let me set the stage real quick. So you're a solo developer. You founded Keygen 8 years ago, and about a year ago you went open source, and more recently adopted the fair source license. And your business is killing it. You make millions. You're just one person. You have 6,000 plus customers, companies like Spotify and Google. So I'm really excited to discuss how you arrived at the present situation, like what this journey looked like, double click on enterprise sales. I'd love to hear about how you handle it, and distribution, obviously, how the market came to know Keygen, and we'll get some hot takes along the way too. So very very excited to start. Why don't you tell us where you were born and grew up, like where you went to school, where you studied, and then what your first job was out of college.
Ooh, okay. Yeah. I was born in Kent, Washington. I only lived there a couple years, so I don't remember it. Then we moved to all around. But where I mainly grew up was Oklahoma, in
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma City. Was there for, I don't know, 15 years? So I think about until I was about 17. I was homeschooled. I actually didn't go to college. I wanted to go to college for architecture, but ended up not working out. And then yeah, then I got into graphic design. Did graphic design for a while. Did it professionally for a little bit, and then from graphic design, kind of realized that I hated doing graphic design for customers like clients, because I just kind of felt like their paintbrush, had no creative outlet. But the agency I worked at, so I worked at a marketing agency. The agency that I worked at needed front end developers. Um, and so my boss came up to me. He's like, "Hey, you want to learn front end development?" And I was like, "I guess. Like, I'll try it." And so, I bought a book on, I think a book called HTML and CSS, and then taught myself HTML and CSS over like 6 months. And then eventually at that company ended up being the lead programmer, over a team of like 5 devs. I worked there for quite a while. But yeah, and then that's the company that while I worked there, I came up with the idea for Keygen. Um, but yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that did. Thanks so much. And what was the pain point that you experienced, or the first sort of like spark of the idea for Keygen?
Yeah, so at that company, I was working on a desktop app that me and the co-founders of that company were building. So we kind of co-founded a company together. Um, that so it was just a small. I wouldn't say it's a small. It was a WordPress, like a desktop app for building local WordPress sites. Spinning up a local dev environment, a local host site, and kind of making it a low effort, to get like a WordPress dev environment set up. Because at the time I was a PHP developer, never to go back. But yeah, so that application, desktop application, we wanted to sell it, so it needed a licensing server. And at the time, I was learning Ruby, and I was like, hey, it's a good idea to kind of dig into Ruby on Rails. But first off, I wanted to Google like, hey, is there a licensing API like Stripe, that I can buy? Because we're trying to work with limited resources or limited time to get the desktop app out. I'm already really want to build a licensing server. So, I'm looking, and pretty much all the options are enterprise companies. Like, you have to call them to get a quote. Like, like, and one time I got a quote for one of the licensing services, and it was like $50,000. And I'm like, I'm building a tiny desktop app. I don't have $50,000 to blow on that. Like, we haven't even launched yet. And, so I was pretty frustrated by that. Ended up building a small licensing server in Ruby on Rails for the app. Built it in like a weekend and shipped it, and it worked great. But at the same time, like, that app didn't really do good. The desktop app that I built with the co-founders, mostly to co-founder fit. It was a bad co-founder fit. Um, so we ended up dissolving that app, selling it off. But the idea that, like, man, how has no one built a software licensing API? That was in my head for, I don't know, 6 months, just pretty much gnawing at me. Like, I'm like, why has no one built this? Like, and everyone is like, when I got into programming, everyone's like, oh man, you're a programmer, you can build a business. Like, you can just spin up a business and like, do a software as a service business. So, I always kind of had that in the back of my mind. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to buy a domain name. So I bought the domain name. And then I'm like, I'm going to take like what I learned from that licensing server that I did build for that desktop app. I'm going to turn it into a SaaS. And I'm like, I don't know anything about business. I didn't even know Ruby on Rails. Like, I had built one app. I probably had 20 hours in Ruby on Rails. But I loved Ruby. I had used Ruby for a few years doing scripting for the company I was at. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna put together a landing page and then I'm gonna throw it up on Hacker News. And so I put together a landing page. I hadn't built the thing yet. Like, I maybe put, I don't know, 10 hours into it. But then I threw up a landing page, kind of like what I wanted the API to look like. It was just like a terminal, like this is what it would look like, this is what the JSON response would look like. And, immediately I was on the front page of Hacker News. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I'm answering all these questions. People are like, oh, how are you going to do it securely? How are you going to do this? And I'm like, I don't know. And I'm like BSing my way through all the answers. And so that's kind of how the idea for Keygen was born. And then after that, I spent 6 months building it, and then I launched it on Hacker News, and then I got on the front page again. So yeah.
First of all, I love how you launched for the first time, just announcing your intention. Like, this is the problem I've identified, and it hurt me. I needed to solve it. This is what I've made so far, but this is where I'm trying to go. What do y'all think? And that was the first launch, right?
Yeah, and yeah, I had I'd been watching the Startups for the Rest of Us podcast, or listening to it at the gym for like years. And so like a lot of what they talk about on that podcast is like validate your market and your idea before you waste your time. And so that was my big thing on launching on Hacker News and just throwing up a landing page. Like, I didn't, like I had built a little bit of it, but I hadn't built it yet. And it wasn't like anything that I could show to anyone. But yeah, that validated the idea and validated the market for me. It really got me pumped to like churn out the business, and on the side, because I ran Keygen on the side for a long time, 5 or 6 years. Yeah, 5 years. So
in all this period, could you kind of like play back to us how selling the software looked like? You mentioned earlier how the existing players, you had to speak to sales, and it was like some huge, payments that you had to make. So how did you package it in the beginning to make those first sales, and how did revenue kind of like grow in the first years?
yeah, that's a good question. So you know, early days, I didn't know anything about pricing. I think I had like a $9 tier and then like a 99 and a 199, and I mean, looking back, that was a terrible choice, but I didn't know what the market wanted. So, I mean, in terms of first sale, it took me almost a year to get my first sale. It was hard, and that's a number of reasons. Like, I wasn't good at sales. I didn't know how to market my business other than posting on Hacker News and Indie Hackers and Reddit. So you can only post there so many times before people are like, they're just ignoring you, and I don't like spamming. And yeah, so it was hard, and like the market that Keygen is also makes it hard because to integrate a software licensing API is a big step, and it's a lot. You need a lot of trust. Like, you're not going to have a business, like an enterprise business, come in and be like, hey, we're going to integrate Keygen, this business that just showed up, a month ago, and we're gonna hope that it exists in 3 years. Otherwise, we have software out there on customer, environments that can't be updated, that are using like an outdated licensing server. So there was a lot of like time that was spent like building trust, and like I'm not gonna leave. Like Keygen isn't gonna disappear. So I think that like initially my customer base was indie developers, and people building new companies,
Okay.
because they didn't have as much risk, as someone that had an existing company and they wanted to, license 50,000 users that they already have. And so, I kind of grew with my uh, customer base. Like as I grew, my customer base also kind of branched out into bigger businesses. So yeah, it took about a year to get my first customer, and that was an indie developer, and they're still my customer, which is awesome. I need to send them some swag.
Right.
Um, but
And
yeah, you know,
over time, increasing the lifetime value of the customers and how much revenue you charge them. You said early on it was very little, you didn't really know. What was the main switch you made as you went on to price it more in line with the value it creates? Was it that you started speaking with them and sort of like approaching the process in a specific way? What did that look like?
yeah. In terms of adjusting pricing, most of it was trying to um, adjust my customers, like the type of people that I was getting.
Bravo.
When I would do a pricing change, I didn't. I would grandfather in the existing customers. So it would be like I'm trying to like tweak things and see how it affects things without affecting my customers. I've only done one pricing increase that was on everyone, and that was a few years ago. But other than that, yeah, I went from the $9 tier, and then a few years later, maybe I did a $19 tier as the lowest. And then I would like, but what you'll kind of find in SaaS is that a lot of your high touch customers are the ones on the lower tiers, and the cheaper your service is, the more support those users are going to need. So that $9 tier was my highest support burden. And so raising it to 19, it diminished some of it, but I still had a high support burden. And I'm like, I don't really care to help that much for $19 a month. Like, I'm going to be completely honest. Like, I don't really want to spend that much time helping you. And nowadays it's $49 a month. And, that has kind of weeded out a lot of the indie, like developers, but at the same time, and we can cover it more later, like going source available and fair source has kind of given them a different option, so that I don't have to support, for people for $9 a month, but they can do it for free and support themselves, or like help other people in the community support it.
Early on it looked like you had to establish trust first before more people used Keygen, and then maybe some people were worried, oh, is the company still gonna be around, and there's only one developer here, the bus factor of one. And then maybe they also wanted to self-host, and it was in the best shape for this. So these considerations and others led you to the decision to go first source. Tell us what it is first, what you have experienced as a benefit of making that choice, and what things look like. Yeah.
Yeah. So, jumping. Do you want me to jump straight into fair source, or do you want me to you want me to do it in chronological order on how this came about?
Before first source, you went, you picked the Elastic license. Which one was it?
Okay. So Keygen was, for the first 7 years, it was closed source.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like you said, that bus factor of one was a killer for selling to enterprises. It always came up. They're always like, what? How can we be sure that Keygen's going to exist in 2 years? And I'm like, well, first off, Keygen is 7 years old. It's bootstrapped, profitable. You know, like a funded company is way more likely to go under than Keygen because I'm profitable, bootstrap, like, but you know that's not the best answer. And so a lot of the time, we would go into source code. They'd want source code escrow. So pretty much, I use escrow, like an escrow service, to charge them a buttload of money to have access to the Keygen source code if I died or if the Keygen LLC went under. And I'm like, man, this is really, it's a really annoying setup. You know, I don't like doing it. And I'm like, I want to fix the problem. And so I have a choice, you know, like I could change my lifestyle business and start hiring people. And I just didn't want to do that at the time. That's just not where I wanted to take my business. Like I've spent a lot of time and effort building Keygen into a business that I want to work for, and like a lifestyle business. Like I pretty much get rid of everything that I don't like about work. You know, if I don't like something about work, I just fix it, and I don't like say I don't like doing meetings. I just stop doing meetings. Like that's gonna be a hot take, but I just stopped doing meetings. Like, and I'm not talking about meetings with employees. I'm talking about meetings with customers. Like they want to jump on a call. I'm like, I don't do calls. Like I've said that like 1,000 times to customers, and believe it or not, they do not care. They don't want to do a call either. Like 99% of the time, they're like, "Oh, great," and they send me an email, and then we start doing everything in email. So, and I'm not just like just the indie developers like that do that. I'm talking like Fortune 500 companies. They want to do things over email. They don't want to get on calls either. Like, so yeah, I kind of okay, yeah. So Keygen was closed source for 7 years. Had that bus factor issue. So I was like, you know, I'm going into escrow agreements with some people, and I had even shared GitHub repository access with some customers and enterprise customers, and I'm like, okay, if I'm doing this for them, why don't I just let everyone see the source code? Like, I'm like, what's gonna happen? And so I thought about that for a long time. Yeah, I want to say, so that was 6 years. We're 6 years now into the business. It took about a year to like get up the courage to actually go source available under the Elastic license. So I chose, you know, instead of going like the AGPL route, which I have thoughts on, I wanted to go the Elastic route, which is like pretty much you can do whatever you want with it as long as you don't compete with me in a cloud service. So pretty much I had Keygen Cloud. That's the company that I had been running for 7 years. And then I wanted to offer a community edition and then an enterprise edition. So like all the people that did self-host Keygen or wanted to self-host Keygen, I wanted to push them to the enterprise tier of that, so that I could charge people, because I'm a business. I don't really want to give everything away for free.
Exactly, gotta be sustainable.
So yeah, I split it up into 3 kind of sections: Keygen Cloud, Keygen Community Edition, and Keygen Enterprise Edition. Chose the Elastic license, and went open source. That's what I announced. The people didn't like that, and so going source available under the Elastic license kind of fixed the bus factor issue. I would say 99% fixed the bus factor issue. So now if Keygen went out of business, my customers can host Keygen themselves and pick up the pieces. And as long as they still can't make a cloud service, which is fine. But all my customers, they can like self-host it, get it going. But so that was great, and like I think that going source available under the Elastic license gave me the same distribution as open source, in terms of like, okay, so a closed source product, you have to do 100% of the marketing most of the time, unless you're a big company and you have people, building things on top of your platform and sharing things. You have to do most of the marketing. There's not a lot of guerrilla marketing. There's not a lot of like grassroots marketing. In open source, it's the opposite. So like the users of the software write content on the software. They talk about it online. They build side projects with it. They share because they've used it in a side project, they use it in work projects. They recommend it to their bosses. And so it kind of has this like viral feedback loop, viral distribution model. And so source available gives you that distribution model, most of it, without having to risk your business. Like you can still have a business. You don't have to like, worry about people, selling your software and undercutting you. Like you don't have to worry about what happened with Elastic, where Amazon came in and started offering their service, or a ton of other people like Plausible, the Plausible Analytics service. Like they recently went open core because people were doing, they're just open source monetization has issues, and source available kind of like helped me there to where like I'm being honest and upfront. I'm like, you can use the source code, but I'm still building a business on it, so you can't build a business on it. And so
Why did you decide that?
yeah, so I said it helped 99% of the friction. If Keygen went out of business or I took the product in a weird direction, people could self-host it. Most people. My customers that self-hosted Keygen Enterprise Edition, which requires a license key, which is renewed yearly, after a year, they can't use the Enterprise Edition anymore under the Elastic license. Meaning they can't use it because there's no one to renew their license, and they're not allowed to modify the source code to give themselves the Enterprise Edition features. And the only way to get around that would be to write my own license. That would eventually make it open source. So there were, let me back up a little bit. So at the time, Sentry had relicensed their product under the functional source license, which I loved. So it was pretty much the Elastic license. You can't compete. But after 2 years, it became open source, like real open source, under the Apache license or MIT license. And I really, really liked that. I thought that was like the best of both worlds. You get a 2-year head start, but people can still use your project eventually. They can always use your project. They can just use it under open source terms, so they can compete with you. They can, modify the source code like without restriction, normally, like under the Elastic license, they couldn't give themselves enterprise features. So eventually, I decided, hey, I want to write a new license that's a combination of the functional source license and the Elastic license. I want to make the Elastic license be open source after 2 years. And so I did. I worked with Heather Meeker. She helped write the functional source license. She helped write the Elastic license. Cool. Yeah, we drafted up pretty much a fork of the functional source license. So now we called it the Fair Core license. So at the time, Century was kind of, they had fallen into the same trap of saying like such and such is open source, when it wasn't. It was under the functional source license. So Adam Jacob, I think it started with Adam Jacob from Chef, the co-founder of Chef. He was like, you guys should just make a new brand. You should make like a new term. source available as a term kind of sucks. It doesn't mean anything. If you say a Keygen is source available, all you're really saying is, hey, you can go read the code. But in reality, under Keygen, you can read the code, you can use it, you can fork it, you can redistribute your changes to it, you can modify it. But source available didn't say any of that, and so that was frustrating because I wanted to communicate with my customers that you have a lot of freedom under the license that I chose, but I can't say open source because people get mad. So I really kind of latched onto the fair source a bit.
Which
and
is
I
something
started
new,
working
right?
with,
It's
yeah,
something
and
new.
I
When
was
was
like,
this introduced?
I like the term, and it's honest. It's like you're not trying to deceive anyone. You're like fair source. It's just so the definition of fair source is that it's software that you can use without limitation, and then or no, it's software you can read without limitation, and then you can use and modify and redistribute with minor limitations. And then there's one more clause at the end. It has to eventually be open source.
That's the big thing, right?
And
That after some
yeah,
years,
that's the big
yeah.
differentiator. It's eventually all fair source software will be open source. And so that helped fix that last problem in my sales pipeline, where people are like, okay, they're purchasing Keygen Enterprise Edition, and they're like, what happens to our access to these features if you go out of business? And now I'm like, well, after 2 years, we're open source. So you can go in, fork it, give yourself the enterprise features, change the public key so that you can sign your own licenses, you can rip out the licensing code, you can do whatever you want. So now, so previously I would sell perpetual licenses to people,
Okay.
and that felt really bad. It felt snaky. I'm like, they're like, okay, so they're like, I want to purchase Keygen Enterprise Edition. At the time, I'm source available. What?
Using the cloud.
Yeah, Enterprise Edition is self-hosted.
Right.
So at the time when I was source available, the problem was if Keygen went out of business after a year, your license would expire to Keygen Enterprise Edition, and then it wouldn't boot anymore. So you would have to boot it into Community Edition, which has limited features, and there's no one to renew your license. So what I was doing was the people that wanted to de-risk that, I would be like, okay, buy a perpetual license to Keygen Enterprise Edition, and I'm like, for $50,000, $100,000, and I'm like, that doesn't feel good to kind of.
It still doesn't solve the problem of.
Yeah, it just didn't feel good to be like, well, to fix that problem, you got to pay me a lot of money. But now, all I have to do is sell a 2-year license, and then after the 2 years, they can fork it. Take out all the licensing code if Keygen went out of business. And so now I pretty much, by going fair source, I've removed pretty much every friction point in the sales process that I've had over the last 8 years. So they're like, anytime someone's like, oh, you have a bus factor of 1, and oh, what's the continuity of Keygen? What's the continuity plan there if you go out of business? Fair source answers all those questions, and
exactly.
Gives people options. Gives people that are using Keygen Cloud options, give people that are self-hosting Keygen Enterprise Edition, they all have options. If I take the business in a weird direction and they don't like it, they can fork it. And, eventually, they can fork it now. The Fair Core license allows them to fork it now, modify it, do all that. So yeah, that's kind of like an intro into fair source. I think it's a super, super good distribution model. And it allows you to pretty much have a variety of different business models. You can sell self-hosted software, you can sell cloud software. There's the Fair Core license and the functional source license, which kind of offer both sides. So I'll touch on it a bit. So I didn't choose the functional source license because it didn't have any way to offer or didn't have any way to monetize uh, self-hosted code because Sentry doesn't monetize self-hosted, and
Right.
that was a big thing for me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that's why I ended up writing a fork of that license because I wanted to monetize self-hosted Keygen.
And my favorite thing personally is that all of this came out of a need from the market, like actual pain points from enterprises, from developers of enterprises that told you, hey, this and this, it's an issue for us to adopt it and pay you however much you want. So that's what I like the most about this, that it was born out of a need and it's new. And I think adoption is growing. As a matter of fact, you built this website that tracks the adoption of the first source license. We'll try to pull it up. There we go. Real quick about this.
Yeah, so so previously, before I built this site, I would do like GitHub as like a code search feature where you can
Mm-hmm.
like search the entirety of GitHub. So I would search, like Fair Core license or functional source license, and just kind of keep tabs on, who has adopted it. Because I was just curious, like, because I had been talking about it online a lot. I've been writing about it. I've been, having really deep conversations about it on Hacker News and Lobsters. And I'm like, but are people actually adopting it? And so, yeah, one day I searched Fair Core license and I saw that 6 people had adopted it, the license that I wrote a month ago. And they're using it to sell their software. I was like, oh, this is awesome. I think that's like one of the best, like my favorite moments in my career was seeing that people adopted that license. Because writing that license, I had a lot of imposter syndrome. Like I was like, why am I sitting here writing a new software license? Like, but I needed it. So I built that website because I wanted to keep tabs on like how people are adopting it. So instead of searching GitHub, I, um, you know, I threw together that website. It was also an excuse to learn ShadCN UI, which
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I've been wanting to try out. Uh, and yeah, and I think I built it with Astro and React. But yeah, it was fun. So kind of, I manually reload the data maybe like once a week, um, just to keep tabs on people adopting, uh, just fair source licenses. Because
Yeah.
honestly, I think it's an awesome new licensing model. I think it's way better than open core, and so I'm excited to kind of see that grow. And so yeah, I bought that funny domain name and posted it online. It seems like
And so
everyone
wait, are
likes
you
it.
like officially the author of this or
Author of what? The website?
of the license or like the last modification?
So Fair Source was started by Sentry, but I'm on the steering committee with Chad Whitaker, who works at Sentry,
Mm-hmm.
and then I um, contributed the Fair Core license. So that was written for Keygen by me and Heather Meeker on a fork of the functional source license. And then
Very
yeah,
cool.
I
Very cool.
built the FSS Cool website.
Very cool. Going back to you said the stack you built FSS.cool with. What about actually Keygen? If you could tell us about the tech stack, what you love about it, what maybe are some pain points. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super boring. It's Ruby on Rails. It's hosted on Heroku. It's backed by a Postgres database and some Redis databases. That's it. It's not anything fancy. The front end, and it uses Sidekick. And then the front end is a super old Ember app, which I'm trying to rebuild in React. Um, so I'm currently trying to find a good front end developer for that because I don't like front end development, and that's why the dashboard Ember app is outdated because I don't like working on it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Hey, maybe
But yeah,
you
so
should
it's
try
just
bounties for getting help, right?
yeah, maybe. I mean, honestly, I just want to restart it. But yeah, maybe I should
Scratch,
do
rewrite.
bounties to do the React app.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You
But yeah,
already did
just Ruby
some.
on Rails.
Yeah.
It's a Ruby
Very
on
cool.
Rails API only app.
Mhm. Very cool. So like favorite thing and least favorite thing about working with this stack?
Uh, yeah, I don't have a lot of like least favorite things. I love Ruby on Rails. It lets me move so fast. It's not like the cool kid on the block anymore, but the alternatives outside of like Elixir and Python are like, yeah, I do not like the current you know developer ecosystem. Everything is so complex. They don't have any conventions on how to do anything. So when you start a new project, you just it's like the Wild West. Like I've worked on Node applications before. Before I went full time on Keygen, I worked at a cryptocurrency exchange, and the backend was written in Node, and
Oh boy.
it was written in, well, eventually it was written in TypeScript because of me, but I hated it. Like it's like there's like a billion ways to do things, and then in Rails, it's like there's a conventional way to do everything. Like I can pump out features in a day that would take me like a week doing it in Node and TypeScript. Um, and so yeah, I think
Here the
Ruby
project
on Rails has
is
been.
so sorry. Probably the longer a project is live, like these differences, this contrast, like gets amplified. Like that Node project, like if it was the first few weeks or months versus like year 5 or 7, I think the complexity like grows a little exponentially there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, I've been able to like ship features in Keygen in days and weeks instead of months, and yeah, I really like Ruby on Rails. I don't know if I would choose it for a new project just because I like to try new things. I built Keygen on Ruby on Rails when I didn't know it, but I do love Ruby on Rails, and I think it's like I'm hoping it'll have a kind of a renaissance, like a resurgence with Rails 8 and kind of DHH kind of changing things up a little bit, but we'll see.
Exactly. Speaking of DHH, who actually is very active on socials, that's where we get a lot of news. We were chatting earlier. You told me that you went cold turkey for some time a few years ago from socials. I don't know if you want to talk about this a little.
Yeah, yeah. When I first started Keygen, I was one of those open startups.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Build in
sharing my
public.
revenue. Yeah,
Right.
build in public. Yeah. So I was sharing my revenue on indie hackers, like doing all that stuff, getting all the dopamine hits, and um, yeah. So eventually, I kind of burned out on that. I kind of burned out on trying to be an influencer because I was failing at that. Like I didn't like doing it, um, but everyone told the conventional wisdom at the time were like, you have to be an influencer to have a successful SaaS business, and I'm like, I don't think so. Um, so yeah, I kind of burned out on it, and just like one day, I was like, I'm so sick of trying to like be an influencer and wasting time on social media and sharing everything about my business to my competitors and everything. So yeah, I just ended up, deleting my Twitter account, deleting my interview off Indie Hackers, deleting my business off Indie Hackers. Pretty much, I deleted every personal social media account except Hacker News. Um, and then just recently I got back on Twitter just to talk about Fair Source, because at the time I was talking about Fair Source from my business account, and some people didn't like that. They're like, I don't want to talk to a business, I want to talk to a person. So I signed up, and I was like, okay, I'm here.
Word. Very cool. And like throughout that time where you weren't live, you weren't active on socials, the business was actually growing. Like a lot of people subscribe to that notion that you need to be an influencer, you need to build in public, you need to do all these things because it helps with distribution, because it answers the question, how do people learn that we exist, every day? So that wasn't the case with you. So what were you doing, if anything, because it could all be organic, what were you doing to tell more people you exist, right? And find customers?
Yeah, yeah. So people do have that like misconception where you have to be an influencer to sell. Like in reality, 99% of your users are not on Twitter. They're not. Unless you're selling to other founders, that's not true. You're just searching for dopamine hits. Like that's all you're doing. You're just wasting time. So what I did was I just bought ads. Like bought ads on Google, on Capterra, on Bing, um, sponsored newsletters, sponsored podcasts, like just typical stuff. And so that's how I got my name out there. And then I also, because Keygen is a big part of me, like it would come up in conversation online. Um, Not in a spammy way, but just like, hey, I've dealt with this at my business, or my business will help you here. So yeah, I didn't have like a silver bullet. Like it was just everything compounding that, like just putting in some work somewhere. I never did cold outreach or anything like that, because like I said earlier, I've kind of built Keygen in a way that I'm building Keygen into a business that I want to work at, and doing cold outreach is not something that I want to do. So I didn't do that. So yeah, a lot of the growth in Keygen came from just existing, like not giving up, not quitting, just people seeing over and over and over again, through content marketing, through ads, that Keygen still exists. It's still here. It'll be here when you build an app in 4 years. So the conventional wisdom at the time, like that all the Twitter talking heads told me, was come up with an idea, validate it. If you don't get a customer within 30 days, kill it. Okay, well, in reality, if I would have obeyed that, I would have killed Keygen, because like I said, I didn't get a sale for a year. So you can't just take what the influencers say and obey it. Like that's not how reality works. Like 99% of the problems with Keygen and selling Keygen and why it took a year was my fault. Like I sucked as a founder. Like I sucked as a marketer. I didn't know what I was doing. And so like to blame that on my idea was crazy. Like, because I knew I had a good idea. I needed it. And so I'm like, I couldn't have been the only one. Like I got on the front page of Hacker News. So I was like, I know my idea is good. And so I just, disregarded the conventional wisdom that you need to give up early, and I just didn't quit. And so, over and over again, I didn't quit. I didn't quit when I wanted to quit. I didn't quit when I wanted to sell the business. I just continually not give up. And, eventually it worked out. Like, eventually I learned enough that I wasn't getting in my own way. And I wasn't getting in the way of the growth of my business. But that took a long time. And most people give up by the time that time would come for them. And I wish people wouldn't give up as often, because people have some cool ideas, but everyone tells them to give up early because, frankly, because they suck at the time. Like you need to work on your skills, you need to work on your marketing, you need to work on your positioning, your distribution. Like a lot of the time, it's not the product; it's the founder.
That is very insightful and very, very interesting. And like it can go either way. I mean, there's people that have successful startups and they still pivot away because they're like, oh, revenue should be 10, 100 times like bigger. So even successful projects people pivot away from, let alone one that hasn't had any traction. I relate to what you said. We relate with my co-founder Zaf, because first time we put the notion of an Uber for coding, an Uber for programmers, that you can press a button and someone on the internet appears and writes code for you, helps you out in your repo. The product was shit, and we couldn't get any sales. Now it did hit the front page of Hacker News, and we saw that people were mesmerized by the idea, but the product was shit. And for a year we didn't get any sales either. And then after a while, because we were bad, but eventually as the founders got better at their jobs, we're able to materialize that idea in a way that fits better with the market and provides value. But we experience the same thing, so it's very interesting. And if we followed tech Twitter advice, we should have taken these ideas, both Keygen and Algora, behind the barn and shoot them, right? So it's
Yeah,
interesting
and
because yeah.
that kind of gets into another thing is that people expect like hockey stick growth
Mm-hmm.
immediately because people around them, aka influencers and talking heads on Twitter, get hockey stick growth because they have a following. Like if I showed you my growth chart for Keygen, it just looks like a really, really linear line. That's
Slow
it.
and steady.
There's no like, yeah, it's just slow and steady. Like every year, it just keeps growing every year, and like, just that's why I'm like, Keygen is the way it is now because I've just not given up. Like the way SaaS works, like it just kind of compounds on itself. So eventually you hit that mark. You hit, like my initial goal was, $1,000 a month, and then it was $10,000, and then after 10,000, I stopped sharing revenue, and after, I hit the $1 million in revenue thing, and like, yeah, like
Took a while. It took a while. You didn't
yeah, it
give
took a
up. You
long
didn't
time.
raise funding.
It took years and years and years and years and years. And there was never one point when I saw that like giant spike and all of a sudden I was like the coolest product in the world and everyone was talking about Keygen. Like that never happened. Like it's just slow and steady growth. Don't give up. Like keep grinding. I mean, I wouldn't say grinding. I wouldn't say I grind. I mean, I get off at 5 o'clock every day. So
And you have a family as well, right? So, and no
yes,
meetings.
yeah, I have a wife and 2 kids and one on the way.
God bless, man.
And I get off at 5 o'clock every day. Like I said, I've kind of designed my business around the life I want. So it's a really lifestyle business. I don't work on weekends unless there's an outage or I need to do like, a migration or an upgrade or something. But yeah, like I try to leave work at work. Yeah.
Love it, man. And you said earlier that you have this rule of like no meetings with the customers themselves, and actually a lot of people like it. What is another maybe hack or two that you did along the way that made running your business a lot more, livable for you? What are the processes that you
Yeah,
implement, maybe? Yeah.
yeah. I wouldn't say there was like a hack, but it was
Mm-hmm.
pretty much like what I said. Like if I was doing something that I didn't like for example, when I first started Keygen, everyone wanted to get on calls with me. And so I was on sales calls 4 or 5 times a day, some days. And, I would do probably like 20 a week, 25 a week. And
Oh,
like 2 of them would close. Yeah, I probably suck at sales. But at the same time, I felt like I was wasting my time. Like I could have been working on other things instead of sitting on these calls, answering the same questions. And so one day I deleted the calendar, like book a demo calendar link on the website. And then anytime someone asked, I said, sorry, we don't do calls for non-enterprise customers.
nice.
And
Okay.
and 99, like I said, 99% of the time they would be like, oh, okay, cool. So this is what I would say. I would say I don't do calls for 99%, or I don't do calls for non-enterprise customers, but feel free to CC your tech team onto this email and have them send me questions. And so immediately I get like an in with their tech department, like their engineering department. And so what I found was that I learned how to bypass the sales process in like 90% of enterprise sales. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, like I just happened to stumble upon like this magical way that you can just not do sales. Like, just CC your engineering team, and have them email me, and they email me. They email me this little list, and I answer their questions, tell them how to integrate it, and then we're done. Like this year I've probably gotten on, I don't know, less than 20 calls. I would say less than 15 calls, and I've closed multiple enterprise deals, like a lot of enterprise deals, through email. And so yeah, that's one of those things where I was like, I didn't like doing calls. That wasn't fun to me. Yeah, I'm probably leaving money on the table, but I don't really care. Like if I'm being completely honest, I don't care. Like I said, I don't care about the hockey stick growth. I want to like working at the company that I build and being on sales calls and filling out enterprise questionnaires and doing all of that is not fun to me. And so I just stopped. And 99% of the people don't care. Like they're like, oh, okay, cool. We didn't want to get on a call either. And I'm like, okay, cool. That validated my idea. I'm never getting on a call again.
Well, just to push back a little on it, you said yourself that, you know, if you attach the phone to the funnel a little more and got on these calls and maybe hear more about their problems and go with a solution-based kind of like sales approach, maybe you wouldn't leave money on the table, but now you do. And you said like you don't care. Maybe tomorrow it's different, but it's very interesting. Do you feel like this approach that you're following has put like maybe a cap on what you can ask, or how did you arrive at the number that you quote publicly, or maybe in these few calls you share?
Yeah. So what has helped with that? With I don't really think I've left a lot of money on the table, just to be clear, because I'm very transparent about pricing. Every enterprise customer that I have pays me the same amount of money, and that amount of money is on my pricing page. So when we would get on those sales calls, they they would be like, "Hey, what's your pricing?" And I'm like, pulling up my pricing page, and we're going over how many users do you have, what's your volume, and then I'm like, "Well, there's your pricing." So it was just a big waste of time because I'm like you want like they want to quote, like they want to know what pricing is, and so now like they send me an email and they're like, "Hey, we need to jump on a call to get pricing." I say, "Hey, I don't do calls. Here's the pricing page." Like that's it. So if I did like the typical enterprise sales flow, that wouldn't work. But like I said, I even designed my pricing around the fact that I don't want to do calls. Like none of my competitors show their enterprise pricing. Very few people show their enterprise pricing. It's always like a request to quote,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I
We
I
actually
don't like
pulled it
that.
behind us, so we can see it. And by the way, you use yourself Keygen, right? You dog fooding the product. Like for these enterprise customers, it's actually Keygen that powers
Yeah, so
buying
I
these
use
licenses,
Keygen
right?
to license the self-hosted Keygen Enterprise Edition. Yeah, so Keygen Cloud licenses Keygen EE, and Keygen Cloud is actually an instance of Keygen EE.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a giant crazy mess right now. To launch Keygen Enterprise or to launch Keygen Cloud when I went source available, I had to go to the console and generate myself a license so that it wouldn't crash when I launched it. So yeah, it was just like this crazy thing. But yeah, I use Keygen for Keygen in a lot of ways. Yeah, like I use
Love it.
Keygen to distribute, like Keygen's distribution API to distribute Keygen's command line utility, which interacts with the licensing API. Uh, so yeah, a lot of dog fooding because I find dog fooding show like shows you a lot of problems in your product, which I'm sure you found with dog fooding
Yes,
Algora Live. Like
absolutely.
it like just recently I'm working on a new feature for Keygen, and I'm like, wow, this sucks. No wonder people don't use this feature. Like it's useless. So now I'm working on kind of redesigning it because like it had a ton of assumptions that weren't true anymore for Keygen, and I'm like, no wonder people aren't using this because it's terrible. And I wouldn't have known that unless I was dog fooding it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, let me quickly pull up Algora on the side. You mentioned dog fooding. We recently started using bounties ourselves, and through that process, we identified some things where we're like, "Oh shit! Like this is bullshit." We're giving that experience to the user here. Some corners that we didn't cover at first. So can definitely speak to that. Both the bounties platform and the live streaming platform. I mean, we are live streaming on Algora TV right now, which is open source, Elixir code base, and sometimes things break, and it's very painful when we use it ourselves, and we use bounties to help with that development because also Algora is built by a solo developer, Zaf, my co-founder. Zaf, you want to say a very quick hi to the camera?
Hey.
He's helping with the production here, thank God, because I wouldn't have been able to pull it off. all by myself. So yeah, we're showing Algora on the side, and we're trying to pull up our own. Yeah, there you go. So just you can view yourself showing some of the bounties we have completed ourselves. Here's a cool thing. Made a note from earlier. You said that it took you a year to actually make the decision to go open source. Um, so, like, very quick interjection, like, about us. So we open sourced Algora TV recently. Zaf only started working with Elixir, very recently, and it's our first open source motion. We wanted to get the hang of it. We actually plan to open source the Algora console as well, the bounties platform. And the idea is to actually build an open source alternative to Upwork for developers. One that could possibly also be self-hosted, we'll see. But not we'll see, it will be. I just don't know how much people might want that. But we do want to go there. Choosing a license, we broke our heads multiple times what we should go with. As a matter of fact, first source is one of the choices that we have high up. And for Algora TV, we even edited recently our license and just made it a little custom. So license is a tough thing, man. Like, it's not easy to figure it out.
Yeah, it was a very tough decision. Like I said, like the year that it took me is like it's very documented on GitHub. Like if someone wanted to go back and stalk myself talking to myself, because I did that a lot. Like so yeah, like I had even though I'm a solo developer, I do the normal GitHub workflow, pull requests and everything. I review my own code. So there's a lot of conversations with myself over the last, 7 years. I was closed source, and the the conversation with myself, like adding notes and quoting myself and saying, well, that was a stupid idea. Um, it's all on GitHub, and so yeah, there's like an issue that was like make Keygen open source, and you can see like me struggling with the license and like struggling with the fear of like if I went open source, I might kill my business. And there was a lot of fear there. Like I think it was a little unwarranted, but it was scary to make something open source that wasn't before, especially because it was like a thriving business. Um, and yeah, so yeah, choosing a license was hard. Like I said, I first was looking at AGPL. I didn't like it, and then looked at the business source license, looked at and then the Elastic license, and kind of weighed the pros and cons there, and which one kind of helped me still have a competitive advantage with even if it's open source, like still give me an advantage because I'm the author. So like I don't think like a lot of open source people, or like open source like enthusiasts would take that offensively, like me being like, hey, I want to get paid for my code, like I'm the author, like a lot of people don't like that, and so like that's why I like fair source, because it's like it's not saying, hey, I'm open source, but you can't do anything. Like with the AGPL, like you can self-host it, but it's so like it's so ambiguous in terms of business use that a lot of people don't do it without buying a commercial license. And that just seems like scammy to me. Like I don't know. Like it just seems like you're trying to say something's open source, but you're not really. Like you're not being honest with yourself on why you chose the license. You're saying, I want to look like I'm open source, but I still want people to pay me if they use it commercially or if they want to compete with me. But so with fair source, you're very upfront about that. You're like, if you want to compete with me, or you have to pay me. Like that's it. And so I feel like people kind of twist the AGPL license in particular to their advantage, and kind of like I don't know. I've written about it on Keygen's blog. I'm not a big fan of how people use the AGPL in startup in startup land. For normal open source projects, it's fine. It's a great license if you like copyleft. But in startup land, I feel like people use it dishonestly. And I particularly I don't like it,
Mhm,
and so
mhm,
that's why I didn't choose it for
mhm.
Keygen,
And
and I went a
and
different route.
And again, I should mention it's a complicated, difficult topic. I'm very glad that we're having this lengthy conversation here about open source licenses. Some people put more attention than others to it. Others just want to move fast. What licenses now? We haven't even sold anything here. It's not. It's barely a business. Like it's a, and others are like much more anal about it, much more careful. But it's complicated. I appreciate going into first source. There is a very, very reasonable, viable option for people to adopt, and I think the graph on the website we saw speaks to that, with the adoption growing, and we might even ourselves, um, take this route with the Algora Bounties platform.
Do
So
it.
you have figured. Go ahead.
Oh no, I said
Um,
do it.
yeah, no, I'll definitely hit you up to maybe answer any questions that come up, but I think it's gonna happen. So now you figured out your licensing, your packaging, your pricing, like the business is like growing. What's your next goal, or what's a challenge that you have in front of you that you need to solve, if you could share?
Yeah, the big challenge right now is that I have a lot of projects and I'm only one person. So I've hit the point in my business where like I'm starting to be the roadblock on new projects. I need to get like I want to redesign Keygen's dashboard, and I want to launch a couple auxiliary products. And
Keygen
being a
related
solo
or?
founder, yeah, all of them Keygen related. Like one of them that I just hired an agency to help me build one, which is kind of solves the problem of offline licensing, offline floating licenses in like an air gapped environment, which is really complex because you can't use Keygen, the Keygen's API in an air gapped environment because they can't contact the internet. They can't hit Keygen's API. So yeah, so I've been building a project there to handle that problem. But then you have like Keygen Portal, which is the dashboard app. I'm stretched in there. I don't like front end development very much, so I've been trying to hire. So hiring has been a big thing, um, and I've hired a couple people and haven't had good fit, unfortunately. Which that's probably on me. I mean, obviously it's on me. So yeah, biggest challenge now is like more on like business side, kind of like making the business less reliant on me to like
Mm-hmm.
build new things, because I'm kind of at the stage where I want other people to help me build things now. I built everything. I designed Keygen's brand. I built the marketing site. Literally built everything for 8 years, and so yeah, I'm at the point where I'm like, I want other people to help me build stuff, so I don't have to build everything
For
anymore.
sure. For sure. Do you want to
So
be the
that's the
guy who
big like
still
thing.
reviews everything, or also a team
Yeah,
member that
yeah,
takes care of that?
absolutely. Like I
Okay.
love, yeah, I love working on stuff. I just don't want to. I don't want everything to be on my plate. So
Mm.
that's one thing that I've just been trying to wrestle with and figure out best next steps there. Yeah. So yeah, I've been
Mm-hmm.
trying, hiring agencies, hiring consultants, doing bounties, like just trying to see what kind of works, um, kind of the best route there. Because like I eventually would like to hire employees, but I want to kind of exhaust other. Sorry, I want to exhaust other kind of avenues first. Because
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like I said, I kind of like Keygen being a lifestyle business. But never know what the future will hold. 10 or 5 years from now, I might have a handful of employees. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. And I feel you on needing some help to just move faster, get some hit off the plate. And the way we're thinking about it, of course, constrained from cash flow and in line with revenue, what you can afford, what the budget is. But the way we approach it is, instead of like, oh, I need to hire a developer to do the work, it's like, what's the job to be done? Start from there. Oh, okay, you can share bounties or hire a contractor or whatever. And then through that process, you come to identify a person who could join the team full time. So I feel like for hiring specifically bounties, one of the big use cases that we've identified with our customers is that they want to get work done today, and they also want to build a pipeline of talent that they can hire, and they're onboarded already because they worked on the code base. So yeah, I mean, like, my take is, look, not much more fair there. How's your experience been? Like, on Algora, it's been a couple of weeks that you tried bounties yourself. What's it like?
Yeah, it's been pretty good. I sometimes I realize that I'm not very like the issues and specs that I have aren't super clear because when someone attempts something and has a PR, I realize, oh man, I didn't cover this. We need to make these changes. I didn't realize how much of the feature design process with me was iterative, and so I've been trying to be more clear there. But yeah, like I've only used Algora for some small tasks, just kind of to test the waters.
So
Um,
library rewrites for the most part, like some gems.
yeah,
And
yeah, some earlier this year after Keygen went fair source, I open sourced a bunch of code out of Keygen, extracted it into third party libraries, like Ruby on Rails and like Ruby gems.
yeah,
And so I had the Ruby gems, but then I had the code in Keygen that wasn't using the Ruby gems yet. So I created a lot of issues like, hey, swap out this code that was extracted with this gem. Um, and so, yeah, I kind of tested the waters there. It relatively went well. There were a couple PRs that ended up being broken after I merged it, but that is more to do with my CI setup because I need to figure out how to run CI for forks and pull requests
yeah,
because
still
because
challenging.
Keygen uses some GitHub action secrets,
Right.
and apparently you can't use those in third-party pull requests. So that's just another issue. I probably need to put a bounty on that issue, honestly, because it's a little over my head.
Yeah, I think the thing
And
we
a
say.
little, not over my head, but just over, a little too far. It'll take up too much of my time, and it's not really worth the effort for me to do it. So yeah, I need to put a bounty on that. But yeah, it's been
And
good. Like I said, 9 out of 10 PRs have been good. A couple have failed after I merged and required a little bit of work from me to fix CI and fix failing tests. But you know, um, for the most part, those people got something merged and it was in production within 10 minutes. So that was cool.
that is cool. And there's basically different ways to use bounties. The one is just make them public, so anyone can just jump in and give it a go. Another one is use them only with experts. So like these 500 people on Algora that already solved bounties in the past, and everyone knows that they're fantastic in their tech stacks they like, only they can discover bounties. And the third mode is your previous contributors, people who have actually had merged PRs in your project, like you just share it with them, especially for the most challenging things. So what we recommend to new users is sort of like a balance, because we wanted Keygen to show up in the feed and for all the new people to discover it and bring their feedback and questions and interest, but also you want to balance quality with the visibility and with the on-demand sort of getting work done. So it's interesting how that plays out. I'm glad some of the work got done. I know one thing you had to actually jump in yourself and wrap it up because it was a priority. But these are things
Yeah.
we're discovering ourselves as we use the bounties too. Very cool, very cool. We'll see how it evolves as well. On our end, we've been to work with, commercial open source companies that have been on Algora for 15 months, kind of every month, sharing bounties. So that's good. I hope we can say the something like this together in the future. Before we head to the closure, is there a walkthrough, maybe a short demo that we could do? Maybe run through the docs of Keygen. You could highlight some parts of the product.
Yeah, we can go through the docs. That'll work. Let me share my screen. All right, can you see it?
Good to go.
Perfect. Okay.
Maybe zoom it
Yeah,
in just a
so
little. Pardon me.
Oh yeah, I have a giant screen, don't I? Got like a 32-inch OLED. Um, yeah, so like we touched on, Keygen's like a software licensing and distribution API. So the easiest way to think about it would be Keygen is Stripe for software licensing, for license keys, for managing like activated devices and things like that. So we can go into the API. Is the font size good, or do I need to scale it up more?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of API resources. The main one's going to be like licenses. So it's a lot like Stripe, where you can like create a license. It's a REST API, a JSON API. So yeah, you can go in. A lot of this can be done with a UI. Going in and creating licenses. In most cases, creating licenses is done in like an integration with a payment provider like Stripe. Using a webhook integration or using Zapier or something like that. But yeah, it's kind of like a REST API. You create licenses. You can validate the licenses. There's some offline licensing capabilities, and then you can manage machines, which are pretty much your devices for individual licenses. You can go in, fingerprint the machine. Like use your like operating system GUI, and do a fingerprint of a motherboard or really anything that like. So Keygen doesn't do any fingerprinting itself, so it's just like a REST API. So some people will use like a Docker container ID. They'll use the MAC address, an IP address, a domain name. It's whatever your business requires, and that's what you use there. In this case, it's probably like a MAC address, and then Office MacBook. So you pretty much activate that, and then you use that fingerprint when you're going in and doing a license validation. And you're pretty much saying, is this license key valid for this device? And Keygen will come back and say yes, or it'll say no, it's not activated yet, and then you'll go through an activation step so that next time it'll be valid. And so the API can be integrated, client side. It's a pretty big API, but most client side integrations use about 5 API endpoints, mostly around like license validation, offline checkouts, which is like a encrypted license file, and then activating machines and self-managing machines. If you, for example, have a desktop app that you sell 3 seats for, or 3 devices, which is typical for like Mac software. You're like that you buy a license for 3 devices. You can integrate Keygen entirely client side, and so you can do that in a way that your users can manage their own activations. So if they hit that 3 device limit, you can go in and create a UI that lists all their current devices and has like a CRUD interface, like they can delete them or rename them or whatever. So super powerful. You can get down to entitlements, which are pretty much just like a feature flag. You can attach these to licenses, so you can check inside of your software, client side, which entitlements the license has, and like flip on and off features. And then you can manage users. There's a lot more. There's some more complex components to the licensing API. Like hardware components on a machine. If you want to activate, for example, the GPU, the CPU, the motherboard, and the hard drive IDs, but you don't really care if like 2 out of those change. You only care if all 4 change. You can set up kind of matching. We have like a matching engine that you can set up kind of more sophisticated fingerprinting strategies, so you don't get false positives or false negatives where you're like the same device shows up as not being activated when it actually is, when all they did was like change out a hard drive or something. and then you can manage individual processes, you know, controlling application concurrency. You know, like if you sold a AI, you know, self-hosted AI business and you wanted to like make sure that they didn't, you know, run 4 processes at one time across all of their machines. You just wanted to, they have a license to like run one application instance at one time. You can do that this way, so you can enforce like, you don't really care how many machines they have. You just care how many application processes are running at one time, and so you can do that this way. So you know it's super powerful. Like Keygen's very like it doesn't it's not opinionated. So you know you can use it to you know implement a ton of different licensing models just depending on what you want to do with your business model. And so that's one thing that I've been focusing on with Keygen is making it work for everyone. You know, just a lot of different customizations and ways to do things because everyone does things differently. If I've learned anything over the last 8 years, it's that everyone does billing differently. Everyone has a different licensing model. So having an API that has a lot of flexibility has been a big plus. And then yeah, in addition to licensing, Keygen also handles distribution. So you know you can distribute like a Tari application and you know integrate automatic updates. You can then do an Electron application and do automatic updates. You know Keygen's command line tool, we use Keygen to distribute that. You know, distributing the Go binaries. Yeah, and then like I mean, the easiest way to get started is just going to the home page and clicking sign up, and then it sets you up with a free trial or a free account. So I have a free tier. It's a limited free tier, but that's typically the quickest way to get started. But you know, you can take it for a demo on the dashboard to kind of see what it looks like. You can kind of see what you get. But yeah, or you know, Keygen's fair source. So if you don't, you know, you don't want anything that you know, Keygen starts at $20 or $49 a month. Once you move off of the free tier, which the free tier gives you 50 licenses of 50 active license users. So you know, if you have 50 license users, you should be able to afford $49 a month. But if not, you know, you can self-host Keygen for free.
The license and stuff.
Yeah, I don't know how much you charge. I don't integrate with your Stripe account or anything like that. Nope. And I never plan on doing that kind of percentage based, you know, pricing model. I'm pretty against that. So yeah, just a flat fee. What?
And for self-hosting?
Yeah, for self-hosting, yeah, there's some self-hosting docs. You know, it's mainly based on Docker. So, you know, you can just do, you know, you can pull the Docker container and then do Docker compose, and you should be set up. And that's about it. It's super easy to self-host. I mean, it's just a Ruby on Rails app, so it's not super complicated. You can throw it up on pretty much any big hosting platform as a service, and should be relatively easy.
Commercial open source project that sells enterprise licenses can just plug this in and immediately get running, no?
Yeah, I mean, first off, if you do, you know, have an open source project and you're like kind of going down that open core route, I'd look at the fair core license because and maybe read a couple of my blog posts on Twitter or not on Twitter, on Keygen, because it goes into like kind of the pros and cons of open core and how the fair core license and fair source might actually be a better route for for your customers that you know you sell to, because open core you sell an enterprise edition. Typically, I mean, you have some core that you're selling or some proprietary part that isn't a part of the core. In the long run, I think FairCore is a better licensing model there. But yeah, and the FairCore license, uses license keys for that. So Keygen's a perfect fit there. But like if you take other projects, you can go super simple and just do like a hard-coded string at first. That's what Plausible's doing. You really don't have to do anything fancy. Yeah.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much for all your time. I know we went, a little extra from what we had loaded. Any parting thoughts or remarks that you might like to share, or piece of advice for other founders listening?
I don't know. Probably just reiterating, like, don't give up so early. Like, yeah, sometimes ideas suck. Like a lot of, especially like, you know, some indie hackers have like ideas that are never really gonna be monetizable in a big way. But if you do have an idea that you think is monetizable, that you have validated the market for, don't give up so early, because the problem is probably you. Like that was my case. Like the problem was me. Um, so yeah, don't. I'm big on like just don't give up. Like you gain a lot from just existing. Your brand gains a lot over the years from just existing and just growing slowly. Like you don't need hockey stick growth. You can have a normal work-life balance. Like you know, like you don't have to go full time right away. Like it took me a long time to go full time, and even when I did go full time, I wasn't making my salary, and so like it, it's okay to go slow. It's okay to grow slow, and it's okay to like not know everything at the beginning.
This interview going, and I think this will benefit a lot of people, which is ultimately the goal. So thanks so much, Zeke. Really appreciate it. We'll be talking
Yeah,
again
thanks for
soon.
having me on.
Of course. All right, awesome, man.